Meet an old friend, you probably know him better as Augustus. That was the name he gave himself, the very first emperor of Rome, and if you've been watching our series on his life and legacy, you'll know we ended on a note of caution. Despite all his talents, all his wiles, all the glittering victories and diligent policies, there was something about the idea of imperial power that didn't sit right, something unsettling in the thought of a single person wielding so much. And now, less than 30 years later, here we are, standing in the shadow of Augustus's adopted son and heir Tiberius. Now, if you've only read the history books or watched the HBO series, you might think of Tiberius as a mustache-twirling villain, a power-mad despot, who spent his reign terrorizing the empire he inherited. But that's a story best left to the novelists. In truth, Tiberius was a soldier administrator, a man more comfortable managing a province than managing people. He was, to put it bluntly, not cut out for the purple. That's the color, by the way, of the imperial robes, and Tiberius knew it. At the very start of his reign, he asked the Senate to pick someone else. Yet sometimes duty is a sharper blade than ambition, and in the end, Tiberius did become emperor, though perhaps not in the way he imagined. Augustus died in 14 AD, and Tiberius took the purple in the middle of a tour of the provinces. He could have easily delayed his return to Rome, kept the crowds waiting another year or two, but in the end, he came back, probably because deep down he knew he couldn't say no to Rome. So he paraded through the streets in a triumphal chariot. He waved to the cheering crowds, he donned the purple robes. He took his seat in the Senate, and he got to work. He reorganized the imperial finances, stabilized the unruly provinces, doled out land to veterans, and generally set the wheels of the empire in the grooves of stability. And yes, he demanded absolute obedience from the Senate. And yes, he kept a secret police force to root out conspiracies. And yes, he withdrew into his luxurious villa on the island of Capri. But none of that was the real story. The real story is that for nearly 15 years, Tiberius ruled according to the principles of good enough. He didn't want the job. He wasn't born to it, and in the end he proved incapable of it. And that's why his story matters. The story you're about to hear isn't simply about a ruler gone wrong. It's about how power, once unmoored from accountability, can bend a civilization's spine until it forgets how to stand. Tiberius's withdrawal from Rome was not only geographical, it was psychological. The further he drifted from the Senate and the people, the deeper he fell into suspicion. Letters that once conveyed administrative precision began to carry shadows. A senator's hesitation, a general's unguarded word, a friend's laughter at the wrong moment, any of these could become evidence of treason. Fear seeped into Rome like damp through stone. Citizens lowered their voices. Writers sharpened their quills only to burn the parchment after a few sentences. Even silence was unsafe, for silence could be read as disapproval. By removing himself to Capri, Tiberius transformed the capital into a place where everyone watched everyone else. Neighbors became spies, dinner companions, potential informers. The professional delatores, accusers by trade, flourished in this atmosphere. A single accusation, whether true or not, could erase a rival and enrich the accuser. Property confiscated, families broken, reputations unmade, such outcomes became as common as the sunrise. Rome's proud tradition of debate and law shrank into a theater where the script was already written, and the only role for the accused was to fall on their sword, literally or figuratively. Meanwhile, Capri itself grew into a private empire. Its villas gleamed with wealth drawn from the farthest provinces. Officials came not to advise, but to flatter. Ambitious men discovered that gifts and compliance traveled faster than merit. The emperor surrounded himself with astrologers who traced omens in the sky, assuring him that danger lurked in every shadow. Each prediction justified another purge, another execution, another tightening of the circle around him. The empire still functioned, taxes collected, roads maintained, legions stationed, but the heart of power was locked in a chamber of suspicion. It is tempting to dismiss the darker rumors surrounding Capri as invention, but even stripped of exaggeration, the truth remains unsettling. Isolation amplified Tiberius's worst instincts. He no longer had to face the Senate's eyes or the people's voices. Surrounded only by those who benefited from his retreat, he ruled in an echo chamber where fear was the only currency. Ancient accounts describe Capri as a place where reality blurred, where whispers replaced evidence, and where the emperor's word was indistinguishable from fate. Whether or not every sordid tale is accurate, the undeniable fact is that an empire of millions lived according to the moods of one man. The tragedy of this era is not merely the cruelty of a single ruler, but the way cruelty spread like a contagion. Each official who accused a colleague to protect himself, each senator who voted for execution rather than mercy, each courtier who chose profit over principle, they all became part of the mechanism. In the end, Tiberius's power did not rest on armies or walls, but on the small, daily choices of countless people who found survival easier than resistance. And in those choices, the shadow of Capri stretched across the empire. Tiberius's retreat to Capri was not just a geographical withdrawal, it was a profound disengagement. The years that followed marked a slow unraveling of Rome's civic spirit. Outwardly, the empire endured. Ships carried grain from Egypt, soldiers guarded the Rhine, merchants bargained in marketplaces from Hispania to Judea. Yet beneath this appearance of stability, the fabric of society frayed. Fear is corrosive. It does not destroy all at once. It seeps into conversation, into judgment, into memory. Under Tiberius, fear became a form of governance, more efficient than legions. Why risk rebellion when suspicion could silence a man before he even dared to speak? The Senate, once the guardian of Rome's dignity, sank into a theater of obedience. Its members, once fierce in debate, learned to read the emperor's moods from afar, bending their words accordingly. They competed to offer flatteries and decrees that outdid each other in sycophancy. A proposal to honor the emperor might be seconded, not from respect but from terror of what silence might imply. The line between duty and survival blurred, until no one could tell which was which. Senators who once shaped the destiny of nations became actors in a grim play, applauding on cue, condemning colleagues to death with trembling hands. For ordinary citizens, life became an exercise in self-censorship. Parents warned their children not to mutter in their sleep, lest a servant overhear a stray word. Friends hesitated before meeting, uncertain if companionship might be twisted into conspiracy. Even the poets, Rome's voice of beauty and satire, fell quiet. Manuscripts were destroyed, stories went untold. The creative flame that once lit the empire dimmed under the weight of suspicion. In its place grew a culture of guarded silences, of polite lies, of anxious glances over the shoulder. Meanwhile, Capri became more than an island, it became a symbol. Its cliffs loomed in the imagination of Romans who never set foot there. They spoke of it in whispers, as if the very rocks could carry their words back to the emperor's ears. Stories circulated of lavish feasts, of gardens blooming in impossible splendor, of courtiers competing to invent entertainments for their distant ruler. Whether these tales were entirely true mattered less than what they represented. The image of an emperor detached from the struggles of his people, consumed by private obsessions, while the empire carried on without his visible hand. Yet Capri was not just luxury, it was isolation magnified. In his villas, Tiberius was both absolute master and prisoner of his own paranoia. Surrounded by flatterers and astrologers, he lived in a hall of mirrors where every reflection deepened his fears. He tested his food for poison. He trusted no one fully. Even the stars, charted by his seers, seemed to whisper threats. In this atmosphere, suspicion did not fade with time, it multiplied. Rome was governed by a man who saw enemies in every shadow, and an empire that must endure his moods as if they were laws. The story of these years reminds us how power, once detached from accountability, transforms not just rulers but societies. Tiberius may have withdrawn to Capri, but in truth, he carried Rome with him, reshaping it in the image of his fear. The result was a nation still mighty in appearance, but fragile in spirit, an empire haunted by silence. When a decade had passed on Capri, the empire no longer looked to Rome for its heartbeat. All decisions pulsed outward from the island's villas, borne on couriers who carried not just decrees but dread. A senator might wake to a letter sealed in imperial wax, its contents unknown but its weight undeniable. For many, such letters became synonymous with endings of careers, of fortunes, of lives. The absence of a reply from Capri could be just as lethal as the arrival of one. Silence itself acquired the force of judgment. The climate of suspicion reshaped Roman law into a weapon. The ancient charge of majestas injury to the majesty of the Roman state was stretched until it covered almost anything. To question an imperial poem, to carry a coin into the wrong place, to speak incautiously in private, all could be construed as betrayal. Trials ceased to be searches for truth. They became rituals of fear. Informers were rewarded. The accused were rarely acquitted, and families were punished alongside the condemned. The law, once Rome's proudest gift to civilization, became a mask that hid the machinery of terror. Under such conditions, even natural death offered little peace. Estates of the deceased were confiscated, their reputations destroyed posthumously. Children were punished for grieving too openly, as though sorrow itself could be treason. The empire became a place where emotions were policed as strictly as actions. What was once celebrated as Roman dignity now became Roman silence, a quiet born not of discipline, but of fear. The legacy of these years was not only the suffering of the condemned, but the erosion of trust that bound society together. Amid this darkness, Capri itself became a paradox. Its beauty was legendary: cliffs plunging into blue seas, gardens scented with herbs and flowers, villas built with breathtaking skill. Visitors would have seen a paradise. And yet behind that beauty, stories spread of excess and isolation, of a ruler whose days no longer resembled those of his people. Whether exaggerated or true, these accounts reflected a deeper truth: that the ruler of Rome had ceased to be part of Rome. The island's splendor only sharpened the contrast between the empire's surface prosperity and its inner corrosion. What makes this chapter of history so haunting is not only what Tiberius may or may not have done, but what his rule revealed. It showed how fear can warp institutions, how silence can become complicit, how the habits of cruelty can spread without swords or armies. An emperor's retreat reshaped the daily lives of millions who never set eyes on him. His suspicion became their reality, his isolation became their cage. And through it all, Rome continued to function. Markets opened, legions marched, temples stood, civilization endured, but its soul grew heavy with shadows. The story of Capri is therefore more than gossip about a distant ruler. It is a lesson about what happens when power exists without witness, when accountability evaporates, and when fear becomes the language of governance. Rome had survived wars and invasions, but here it confronted something more insidious: an empire bending under the invisible weight of mistrust. When Tiberius's final years approached, the empire he'd built with such care bore little resemblance to the one he'd inherited. Rome remained vast, its borders stretching from the Atlantic to the sands of Syria. Yet the center of its power had narrowed to the thoughts of a single man. In Capri's villas, age deepened his suspicion. He relied more heavily on astrologers to chart his fate, more fiercely on guards to secure his night. Every shadow seemed a threat, every whisper a plot. The general who once led armies with discipline now lived surrounded by paranoia, commanding a world he no longer trusted. His health declined, and with it, the empire's patience. Rumors of his appearance circulated, of attempts to hide his age with cosmetics, of long vigils fearing poison, of erratic bursts of anger. Officials tread carefully, unsure whether a gesture might be read as loyalty or treason. Meanwhile, in Rome, the Senate had withered into little more than a chorus of submission. Decades of fear had trained its members to bow before the emperor's will, even from a distance. The institution that once debated the fate of the Republic now awaited letters from Capri as though they were oracles. And yet, the machinery of empire kept moving. Taxes were still collected. Markets bustled. Armies defended the borders. This continuity was deceptive. Beneath the surface, morale had corroded. Informers still thrived. Families still lived in fear, and conversation remained cautious even among friends. Rome was no longer the vibrant, argumentative society of the Republic. It had become a place where silence was safety, and where the memory of Capri haunted daily life like a storm cloud on the horizon. The death of Tiberius in 37 AD was met not with mourning but with relief. News traveled swiftly. The emperor was gone. In Rome, the people shouted for his body to be cast into the Tiber, as though the river itself might cleanse the city of his shadow. The Senate hesitated to honor him with the rites of deification, breaking with tradition. Only the intervention of his successor secured a semblance of ceremony. Yet even in death, Tiberius was remembered less as a ruler than as a warning, a symbol of what unchecked authority could become. What lingers from his reign is not only the terror of Capri, but the lessons it left behind. Power without accountability corrodes both the ruler and the ruled. Fear, once woven into daily life, can hollow out the strongest institutions. Silence, when chosen over truth, allows cruelty to spread unchecked. Rome endured, but it endured scarred. Its Senate never regained the dignity it lost. Its people never forgot that an emperor could turn his empire into a prison of suspicion. And history never ceased to measure tyrants against the darkness that began on that island. So when we speak of Tiberius, we speak not only of a man, but of a mirror. He reflects what can happen when the limits of power are erased, when fear replaces trust, when society bends until it forgets how to stand straight again. His reign is not just Rome's story. It is a story for every age that forgets how fragile civilization truly is.